Hey everybody, we are Martin, Robert, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hey everybody, welcome back to Snakes and Otters. I am Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
Welcome to episode 45. I know we hinted last time that we were going to talk about the election of 1820 with this idea of it was one of our series of dirty elections or controversial elections, because we've already talked 1972. But our memories faulted us or failed us, and actually 1820 was not a controversial election.
Right.
1820...
That was probably the last non-controversial election
well, that's
in
true.
U.S. history.
It actually was.
And you're going to give a little background on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Because it sets things up.
The election we were really thinking about was 1828.
Yep.
But in researching this a little bit, guys, I started looking at this and, well, you know what? 1828 doesn't really make any sense without talking about 1824.
Right.
And 1824 really doesn't make any sense without talking about 1820. So it does kind of go in a series.
Yeah.
But it is pretty interesting what happens, because you guys, you're absolutely right. Not only is it controversial, but it really is kind of the first modern election in 1920 or in 1828.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
well, it is and it isn't in the sense that, because I always go back to the first truly modern election as far as the electioneering dirty tricks that we think of today really was 1800. That got some nasty
that's
stuff.
That's its own story, too.
The only thing that sets that apart from being a truly modern election is it was pre-political parties. It was really the first one where they'd kind of split into parties, but it wasn't really gelled like it is. And it was even before the 12th Amendment to the Constitution that changed how the election process was actually done.
Right.
But as far as dirty tricks, it is way up. It is right up there with these 1824 and 1828. Yep.
And you're absolutely right. And that, again, that plays everything that happened then figures into what happens in 1820, 24, and 28.
Well, you raise a very good point. It's very important that we realize that the political process in general, and if you're paying attention in modern times, this should be obvious, is a cyclical thing. What happens previously always informs where things go with the next time.
Well, it's cyclical and it's a pendulum.
That's right.
It swings to the right. Today we use the terms right and left. Swings to the right, swings to the left, swings back to the right. And nowadays, hardly ever stays in the center at all.
Yeah.
All right.
And sometimes trying to understand them is a little like chasing a chicken in the barnyard. They could be tough to get a hold of.
Well, you might be kind of saying something about the American electorate by doing that, because are we? I don't think we're fickle. I really don't. But I do think that. Well, I'd say that, and I think that we're willing to give only so much at a certain time. You notice how we kind of flip-flop back and forth with priorities and sometimes parties. That seems to be something that, at least in modern times, we're only going to give so much. Give one group so much. Maybe that's the American way of thinking.
Well, and actually, I think I will modify my. I think they're a fickle statement to this. The percentages in our two main political parties today vary depending on the time and whatever else is going on, but essentially 35 to 40% of the U.S. electorate belong to each of the two major political parties.
Right. Yes.
Solidly so.
And nowadays it is solidly so.
Right.
Yeah.
30 years ago it was not so solid. There was the middle that middle undecided also included a lot of I'm a Republican so I can vote in my primaries, or I'm a Democrat so I can vote in my primaries, because that was the big deal here in this state.
It was.
When I first came here. Everybody was a Democrat. Why? So I can vote. What do you mean so you can vote? They don't let you vote if you're a Republican here?
My father would say that exact same thing. He thought they were ridiculously dead here. He says if you want to be involved in Kentucky politics, you have to be a Democrat.
Right.
But that's a very different Democratic Party.
Right.
That's a blue dog conservative Democratic Party.
And that's more of a regional thing where that sort of thing happens.
Right.
Although now, nationally, we are very solidified into those two extreme bases.
Right.
That middle, that 20 to 30% in the middle, is the fickle part.
Yeah. That's
That's the fickle part.
Yeah.
Very much so.
It's
That's what decides elections.
They decide a consensus and pull one way or the other.
And they go
that's the way
both
it's designed.
ways.
But it is the way it's designed to work.
Right.
Yeah.
But my point, I think, is that I think at our core as Americans, we're very anti-tyrannical. We don't like to give any one party, if we're thinking at all like this, not all of us do, but those of us that do, we don't think that nobody should have too much power themselves for too long. Maybe this, I don't know, I don't think that that's always deliberate. I think that's almost congenital.
Well,
we just kind of go that way.
And that's part of why the pendulum swings.
That's exactly right.
I think that's mainly true, though, only at the presidential level. Because when you look at the re-election rates
and
to
that's
the
what
Senate and the House,
to.
The rates are lower than they used to be. But when we first came of age, they were in the mid 90s to high 90s.
Yeah.
If once you got in, you stayed in. Because the power of the incumbency is a big deal.
That is
now,
huge.
with social media and other changes to how elections work, the numbers are lower. And some guys and some women, they just get out because it's just too nasty. So the turnover is a little bit higher.
Unfortunately, those are probably the better ones too.
Probably. There's probably some truth in that. One of the things that since you're taking a sip of your bourbon there, what are we drinking today?
This is Four Roses.
Yeah,
Four Roses.
Yeah, that's right. We're all drinking Four Roses.
I just poured for everybody, and darn, it's good.
It is very good bourbon.
Very good stuff.
One of the interesting things I saw in reading about the elections for 1824 and 1828 is that the 6 prior elections basically had eliminated any two-party system.
Right.
It was all one party.
Yeah.
Because everybody else was ineffectual.
That's unbelievable
6 straight
to us.
presidential elections went to the same political party with really the last several of them were candidates of the same party.
Yeah.
So now
kind of the anointed.
Kind of. And now they were. By the time we get to 1820 and 1824, they were very factionalized, though.
Yeah.
So they were ripe for a split.
Right. That's part of what I wanted to cover too. You set it up just perfectly, Robert. 1820 is Monroe's re-election,
Right.
and he's essentially unopposed.
Right.
Because really, only one party exists at this time.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's called the Democrat-Republican Party, essentially founded by Jefferson and Madison and Monroe early on to oppose the Federalists, which essentially is opposing Alexander Hamilton.
Right. John Adams at first, but that's...
and Hamilton emerges as kind of the driving force behind the partisanship on his end. And, there's a lot of things going on. It's mercantile interest versus agrarian interest and all that stuff.
The Second Bank of the United States was a big issue.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, huge.
Yep.
And that would continue through all this, too.
Yes.
But essentially, the Federalist Party collapses because of the War of 1812. They sit on the sidelines. Madison wins. It's the Second American Revolution. And essentially, after that point, the Federalists just have no momentum. They basically don't exist anymore. And essentially, everybody now is part of this Democrat-Republican Party. And traditionally, at this point, really the launch pad for a presidential campaign is the office of Secretary of State.
Yes.
Not the vice presidency at all.
What did one vice president call it? Basically worth a bucket of warm spit.
Yeah. That's right. It was probably if it weren't constitutionally mandated, it was irrelevant.
It was empty sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes when a president came to the office from being the vice president, they
had no mechanism for most of our history,
right?
Which is astounding when you think about it.
Well, we did fix that eventually.
We did,
but
so they just left it open because it didn't matter. But in the past, traditionally, the launch pad was Secretary of State. Jefferson had been Secretary of State. Madison had been his Secretary of State. Monroe had been Madison's. And on and on.
Yeah, the last 3 presidents elected prior to 1824 were Secretary of State for the guy who was president before them.
And they were all ideologically together anyway. They were generationally different, but they were successors, anointed successors in many ways.
Yeah.
Madison was, because of their ages too, Madison was Jefferson's anointed successor, Monroe was Madison's. So we've got this essentially one-party rule. And this Monroe's term was called the era of good feelings. There was no partisanship going on here.
Well, there was no major... At the national level, I'd say that's probably very true.
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Yeah. But I mean, as far as partisanship, these factions are starting to build because in 1820, right around there, you have the quasi-war issue, which actually there's a couple of those in our history. Mm-hmm. You've also got the Second U.S. Bank, which is an issue.
Yep.
You've got Florida, which thank you, Andy Jackson, for getting us Florida. Although a lot of people say, Andy Jackson, you bastard, you gave us Florida. Not because of Florida, just because of how we did it.
Yeah, it was not.
You're very right. There's a ton of tumult in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
You're just emerging from the Napoleonic era.
That's right. Yeah.
France is struggling to find its way.
Right.
Britain
As a matter of fact, right
dominates.
around this time, they get back a king and dump him like within a few years.
Yeah.
During this time, this
The
particular
Bourbon
time frame.
Restoration and
Absolutely, yeah. Louis the 18th does not last long at all. In fact, the 1820s, there are you have the next one, Charles the 10th, I believe. He doesn't last long. And next thing you know, you've got a constitutional crisis there. They're kicking them all out and bringing in Louis Philippe, which is an Orleanist, and man, we're getting really into the weeds on this stuff. But all this stuff is going on while you've got enormous powers rising in Europe. So Europe's really not messing with us like they did in 1812.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why that we call this an era of good feeling. Because,
That's right.
While there was a panic in 1819 or 1820, so there was an economic crisis.
Yeah.
But with only one party, you really didn't have anybody to blame or run against.
Yeah.
And so, with lack of foreign intervention, we were pretty much left to do whatever we wanted to.
Yeah.
And that alone, for Americans, is usually a good thing.
But you're right. This is that pinnacle of all that stuff.
Yes.
Because
Sooner or later, the pot has to boil over.
There's a couple of interesting things going on in that you're starting to see westward expansion.
Right.
And Monroe sort of loses control because it's his second term.
Right. He's lame duck.
Nobody cares anymore. We've done all we can for him. He's done all he can for us. So that's when you really do start to see this split, and the split becomes very interesting. Again, this is in 1820, the first time you really have Westerners running.
Yep.
Jackson is considered a Westerner.
Yeah, Jackson's from Tennessee,
which is
and
anything west of the Appalachians is a Westerner.
Westerner. And the other interesting person that's running is Henry Clay from Kentucky.
Also a Westerner,
And Clay is quite a figure in U.S. history.
Very much so. Almost president on a couple of occasions.
Yes.
Never quite.
He's one of those guys that, on paper, you have that resume, Speaker of the House, Senator, Secretary of State eventually, and you're like, how did this guy not become president? Yeah. But that's the way it works.
Well, that's kind of the story we're about to tell, because you're right. Ordinarily, Clay should have been able to do this, but the crucible in which all this happens comes out to be very weird.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have happened this way, but it also kind of illustrates some things about the system, too, as you'll get into.
Yeah. So, and there's no nominating conventions. This party's not aiming itself to have one guy.
Right.
It's just...
Whoever gets nominated, states could nominate, individual states. As a matter of fact, Andy Jackson was nominated within, I think, something like 18 months of John Quincy Adams being inaugurated for the next election. So he's already on the ballot.
Well, Jackson didn't intend to run in 1824. He was not wanting to at all, and
he got drawn into
it. But if you know anything at all about Jackson, all you've got to do is say, "We want you," and he's there.
He viewed it as a challenge and an obligation.
That's correct. That's right.
And,
it's hard to paint Jackson simply. He is a very complex figure. He is both a demon and an angel at different times, you might say.
Yeah. So before we move on to that, one of the things I want to point out that makes these elections so interesting is that we are still not at a time when every citizen got to vote for president.
That's
a good number of states, their electors, because remember the electors are actually who elect the president, are chosen by the state legislatures.
Yep. Right.
In some cases, like in Kentucky, there are regions, basically congressional districts probably, or something close to it, that choose by popular vote in those districts who their electors will be.
And then the electors do what they want.
For the most part.
Sort
but
of. They're beholden, yes.
They're beholden certainly on the first ballot because in 99% of the cases, it's going to be a done deal. You know,
This was
and some states, I don't know if they did then, but some states now have faithless elector laws, which I don't know if those have been challenged constitutionally. But back then, not everybody got to vote, which is a very interesting thing. I didn't realize it was this late into the American experiment.
It's still far more indirect at this point than it eventually is now. We're pretty close to direct elections, not quite, but there's very few barriers between the actual popular vote and
of all the elections, there have only been 5 that have gone to the House of Representatives.
This would be the second one.
And this would be the second one.
Yeah.
In 1824.
In 1820. So, yes, in 1824, there's actually 4 men running. John Quincy Adams from Massachusetts, Andrew Jackson from Tennessee, William H. Crawford from Georgia,
who nobody knows,
and Henry Clay from Kentucky. And again,
those other 3 we all know, though.
You've got 2 people from kind of the traditional states in Georgia and Massachusetts. Massachusetts has already had one president.
But very separate, too, though.
Yeah.
Because
you definitely have a northern state and a southern state, which is not yet a distinction. That's coming.
But this is one of those early cracks that you see of this regionalization that you've got.
Because very much so, you can look at a map and you can see which regions voted for which guy.
Right.
Yeah. And then, of course, again, Jackson from Tennessee and Clay from Kentucky. And another little interesting piece of it is Clay detested Jackson.
Yes.
Yes.
I think he says at one point, just because he killed 2,500 British at New Orleans doesn't make him qualified to be president.
Yep.
Of course, again, with Clay, qualification means I won elections already. I'm Speaker of the House and all that. So you have these 4 candidates out there nominated from different mechanisms within this one party.
Right.
And nobody gets to the 131 electoral votes needed to win.
Right.
Jackson has the most at 99.
He's still quite a bit shy.
Yeah, it's quite a bit shy, and Adams was close to him.
Yeah,
I think he was 84, 87, something like that, 87. So he's not that far behind him.
Clay comes in third.
Yeah.
Crawford is last. Now,
but they're not far off.
No, that throws the election, as you say, to the House of Representatives under the 12th Amendment. So, Clay, he's Speaker of the House.
Yes.
This is his party.
Yeah.
This is his dog right here. He can't really be. He's not really a factor.
No, because
it's only the top 2.
That's right.
That you have to decide from.
No, they got to decide from the top 3.
That's right. They have to dump the one at the bottom, and that would be Clay.
No,
Crawford. Crawford finished last, so he's out of the picture.
Right.
Clay probably can't get there.
Right, he's too far behind.
Well, he is. Yeah, looking at the numbers here, Jackson comes in with 99 electoral votes. Quincy Adams has 84, and Clay only has 37. He's way down compared to the others. So he realizes, coalition-wise, I cannot dethrone both of them.
Right. Yeah,
I can dethrone one of them.
Yeah. So again, he detests Jackson, they were competing for the same votes.
Right.
They're both Westerners. Again, that's what's important about them both being Westerners. They're going after the same votes, and Clay really is like, this upstart from Tennessee is taking my votes.
Right, because Clay considers himself, rightfully so, a master politician at this point.
Yeah.
He's a statesman. He's truly an early statesman.
That's very much so.
Yeah, he's a policy wonk, too.
Yeah.
Because he's the guy coming up with things for this party to actually do.
Yeah, well, eventually, when it comes to the whole slavery issue, he's the one that comes up with the Missouri Compromise.
Yeah. And he's the one that he calls it the American system, where he's the guy that's bringing up internal improvements, canals, new roads, things like that, for the government to do, because he feels like that brings the country together.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, too, because one of the things you can actually make a pretty good, cogent argument, one of the reasons that everything goes off the rails as you approach 1861 with the Civil War is because Clay is gone. Clay's the only one that's able to somehow facilitate this inter-territorial rivalry and keep the peace and keep the Union together in many respects. And then you have idiots like Stephen Douglas who comes in, and you have Bleeding Kansas, and then boom.
Well, I mean, we could do an entire episode. Maybe we should.
And I think we should.
Causes of the Civil War.
We talked in our Sherman episode that we need to do a Lincoln episode at least. That's probably a long... I submit we could probably do 2 or 3.
Oh, well, yeah.
You can tie all that together.
Yeah, because in many respects...
Between the war in war against Mexico, where we basically annexed Texas,
that's right.
Up until 1860, that whole period is just rife with things to talk about.
Oh, yeah. It's so prophetic in many ways.
Yeah.
Because, now, of course, we have the benefit of hindsight, but you look back and you see some of those moments politically. Henry Clay was a huge piece of that. And we forget that too much because he's a little bit before. By the time we start talking about the Civil War, we start the discussion usually later, but we forget that he's the one that created... It would have happened earlier.
Oh, yeah, the seeds of the Civil War started with the compromise that the Mississippi,
Missouri Compromise.
Was that the one in 1820?
1820.
Yes.
So that was Clay.
Yeah. So, but that's where the seeds of it eventually started.
That's correct. It actually worked pretty well, but Stephen Douglas, God, I almost cursed him. I'm not going to do that, but I come real close to that because he's the one that undid that with the whole Kansas-Nebraska Act.
Well, no matter what, as long as we were, and this is
sooner or
so
later,
off topic.
We
were going to have, we were going to go down a
sooner or later somebody's
going
to pull that rug out. Somebody, and it just so happened it was Douglas, and he, especially considering he's the foe of Lincoln and all that sort of stuff, he's been reviled. He was actually a pretty important politician at the time, but he was. I mean, you talk about a racist bastard. Douglas,
by today's standards, all of them were.
Oh, but I mean, really, this guy here, I mean, totally unpalatable in all ways. Yeah. And yet he was extremely popular at the time, which may say something about the times.
Yeah. All right, so back to 1824.
1824, yes. Okay, rabbit hole exited.
One thing I do want to point out, though, don't forget this. No, not a rabbit hole. John C. Calhoun. He is the vice president under all this.
Yeah.
And almost unanimously so. We elect our vice presidents separate. He has united the country under himself. He's a Southerner, South Carolina. So there is this attempt or desire to, which these candidates should be able to figure out, we want one guy. We just haven't figured out which one it is yet.
Yeah.
Well, and Calhoun ends up being a very polarizing figure.
Correct.
He ends up being somebody that none of them can really stand, and he can't stand any of them.
Well, that figures
that's later.
That's right. It figures in
the
a whole lot
other
of
thing
this.
that's is interesting, really, too. This is kind of the first election where there's none of the original generation of patriots is really a force here.
Well, yeah, Madison is gone, Jefferson's gone, Adams is gone.
And Monroe
he's their successor, but he's done.
But he's the same. All of these guys are really that second set. Quincy Adams, obviously, son of the
right.
So these
guys were around during the Revolution. They were just young during the Revolution.
Well, yeah, so young, in fact, they would be children in most cases.
Jackson was actually captured by the British, and because he would not shine the boots of a British officer, he was struck and scarred.
Yes, that's right.
So that's one of the reasons why he hated the British. One of the reasons why he was so against what was going on at the time, because the Monroe, if I remember correctly, Monroe was all for closer ties with Britain.
Yeah.
Jackson wanted nothing to do with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The memory for him was very deep for lots of reasons.
Yeah, so it's very much, these men are all making their marks, not during the Revolutionary period, but after.
Right.
Again,
the world
Quincy
is
Adams
different now.
Is making a mark after. Jackson's making a mark in the War of 1812. Clay is making a mark as a legislator after all of this.
Right.
So, pardon me. What happens is that Clay basically rounds up the congressional delegations that voted for him and says, throw it to Adams.
Yep.
Adams then turns around and makes Clay his Secretary of State, which, as we've said, that's the springboard.
That's right.
That's basically acknowledging that's the heir apparent.
That's right. Wink, wink, shake, shake.
Well,
You're
at
my
the
guy.
time, it was considered a corrupt election because of this.
Yes.
Because even before it happened, the press said that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
That Adams had promised him the Secretary of State position if he would get the election thrown to Adams.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, now depending on the sources you read, one of the ones I read said, that he thought, well, they're going to think I
Do it anyway.
they
Did
did
it
it
anyway,
whether
so-
I take the job or not. So I might as well take the job.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, there was never any corroboration
Right, that's
that
been-
he did it. But Jackson's people said it was a corrupt bargain. And you're right, Clay said, well, no matter what I do, that's going to be the feeling, so I might as well take the job.
Right. Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, and all things being equal, he was a damn fine Secretary of State. Clay, you can't really say much bad about Henry Clay. When it comes to politics, he knew his stuff.
Yeah.
But, he's going to be tainted by...
That is
everybody
cor-
involved is
That
tainted.
is correct. That's
Yeah.
right. Everybody
Yeah.
here has got a little... Jackson has become that smeared man. He's become the one who's wronged. Going into the
Yeah.
next election, he has that behind him, and there's power in that.
He's, he's the cute girl that gets left at the door at the prom.
Yeah, and-
Because the boyfriend took somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
So, he wins a large plurality, not majority, but plurality
Right.
of popular vote. So, by all, and, not nearly as large of a plurality of electoral votes, but large enough, it's kind of like what we just saw with the election in 2016. Hillary Clinton wins the popular vote by some 3 million votes. That's a lot of votes.
Right.
But she screwed up and didn't campaign in the right places, didn't get the electoral votes.
Yeah, and especially somebody with the political acumen that she has or supposed to have had, you would think that
Should have known better.
we should. Yeah, there's some
Now,
truth to that.
Back then, that would didn't have polling like they do now.
Well, yeah.
She should have saw that coming. They couldn't have known that as well
Yeah.
back then as they did today. So Jackson comes out of this. He is really furious.
Well, and he's
And all
got
of
a
a
He thought it was his.
And-
he had
and-
99 electoral
and
votes. He
he-
thought it was his.
And he has a good case.
Well, that's
Yeah.
right.
He has a good
Jackson
case.
is notoriously, if you read about him, you know this. I mean, we will talk about a bad temper. This man, if you
Yes.
want to look into the dictionary and look up bad temper, it's probably got Jackson's face beside it.
He was
Because-
infamous for dueling. That's how bad
Absolutely.
a temper he had.
He actually was shot in the chest dueling in Tennessee. Ended up killing the guy afterwards. After he's been shot in the chest, mind you, offs the guy and carries that bullet the rest of his life. You want to talk about a tough... Old Hickory doesn't even begin to describe this.
Yeah.
This guy here is a badass of badasses.
And he can hold a grudge.
And he can hold a grudge. We know that.
Yeah.
That's so, he's not somebody you want to piss off.
Right.
But they have effectively done so. So, there's a butt whooping coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's 1824. A total mess.
Total mess.
And
And,
again-
the campaign starts for 1828 almost immediately.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's not even, again, party versus party. It's all these guys are all supposed to be one party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's
Effectively,
factionalism
that-
Westerners and this new generation and a general versus a legislator and
Yes,
this,
and he was seen as a war hero. That's huge.
and just this old style Quincy Adams, tie to the Patriot generation.
Yeah, absolutely. Being the son of John Adams did carry a little bit of weight, too. So,
Yeah.
it's not like Quincy Adams is some impossible candidate or should have never gotten elected. He was very qualified.
Yeah, well, he had been Secretary of State.
Absolutely.
And-
He's gone through the cursus honorum, as
Yeah.
it were.
He's the author of the Monroe Doctrine, basically.
Exactly. So,
I mean,
this, I do not like to, in any way, think that he was some sort of a hack. He actually
definitely not.
did a really...
I mean, he's a very qualified candidate.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's probably one of the few really, how do you not win re-election of one-term presidents?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Usually one-term presidents have something really massively bad
That's right.
happen.
He should have, because he doesn't really make any bad mistakes. He's actually a pretty good president. But all that happened to getting him there
That
was
taints the entire
taints
thing.
the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing.
So that sets up 1828, which is the one that we really had
want to talk-
remembered.
Yes.
And I'm glad you brought up about, Robert, the process, because in 1828 that's beginning to change.
Yes, there were some changes
Yeah,
made.
that's,
There are changes made in
essential to understand,
Yes,
too.
it's
Still
really
not a
is-
full popular vote for the electors yet, but it's...
Yeah, more and more people are becoming eligible to participate in this process,
Mm-hmm.
and it starts to change the character of these elections.
Yes. I think the places where you see some places where the changes were made actually backfired because I think it was Pennsylvania. They had their delegation would have been seen as an Adams delegation. But the changes they made actually split it more down the middle.
Yeah.
The way the selections were done. But I think as you get those new states coming in, they're going more for the popular vote method of choosing the electors.
Yeah. So that part's changing. It's becoming more of there's more participation for the average person.
Yeah, that's a really key thing to understand. Prior to this election, much of American politics is still an elitist game.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes, Jackson's very much an outsider.
He is an outsider.
He's the first president born in a log cabin, believe it or not. Everybody else was born in fairly affluent surroundings, and he is born in poverty.
Right,
and that's unheard of. Although that's part of his mystique for a long time.
A man of the people, kind of.
That is exactly right.
Yeah.
And the war hero was part of that, and the fact that he is just a larger than life, kick butt kind of guy. People like strong leaders, and there's no doubt whether you love him or hate him, he's definitely that.
Well, and he had his successes on the battlefield.
Yep.
Again, they're controversial by today's standards. The war against the Creek, which is actually part of the War of 1812, very controversial by today's standards. Takes Florida, basically decides to invade Florida on his own, which is just so Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we have to take over Florida because, well, we've already got it. We can't give it back.
Yeah.
Then of course,
there's a bunch more stuff I want to talk about along those lines with Jackson. Because yes, you're definitely on the right road. But let's hit 1828 first, because there's still a couple more pieces. Not to just like chop you off at the knees, Robert, but
maybe at the feet, but
maybe at the at the waist, just below an appendage.
No, dude, keep the appendage intact.
Yes,
must keep the appendage intact,
and never step on it.
Yeah, and never step on it.
But we do our best.
Okay.
Although if you can step on it, bravo!
Well, that took a turn when nobody was expecting, did it?
So, in 1828, not only you had all this resentment brewing, but now Jackson's resentful enough that he splits the party. This Democrat-Republican party essentially ceases to exist. Jackson,
sort of yes, sort of no. I mean, it still is around afterwards, but there's a division.
Yeah, there's really nobody in it because everybody's got to pick sides.
Right.
Because Jackson and his supporters form what's called the Democrat Party or Democratic Party.
Right.
The forerunner of what still exists today.
Right.
Basically, when you talk about the Democratic Party today, you're talking about Andrew Jackson.
The Party of Jackson.
The Party of Jackson.
It's what he formed.
Yep.
Out of the
God,
ashes.
that must be galling today.
Well, you think so? Yeah, that's correct. Because many of the people that belong to the Democratic Party, the coalitions that do there, find him absolutely unpalatable.
Well, and for good reason.
For good reasons.
Because, he's unpalatable should be unpalatable
that's correct.
For Republicans.
We anointed him
for the same reason.
Historically, for a long time before we realized, well, wait a minute, he did what?
Yeah,
well,
I mean,
we haven't even gotten to the Trail of Tears yet. My Lord.
Yeah.
That's
and I want to hit that. I want to hit that here, too. But and then Adams, the sitting president, and his supporters now have this rump into this Democrat-Republican Party, and they decided to change its name to the National Republicans. Of course, he's their nominee. He's the sitting president. Jackson is the nominee now of the Democratic Party. And yes, this is the dirty.
It gets
election.
dirty.
Really
it
dirty
is,
election.
It is probably more. It is probably dirtier than 1800, mainly for this reason, and that's the attacks on his wife, on Jackson's wife.
Yes.
Even in 1800, I don't think they went after families. I'd have to do a little research on that. That was still pretty much off the table, but they went after her. She was divorced. Theoretically, there's still some question. Depending on the sources you read, there's still a question as to whether or not the divorce that she thought happened really did.
Yeah,
but they ended up getting married a second time just to make sure after they knew for sure that it was final. Yeah. But they called her an adulteress. They actually said, "Do we want a convicted adulteress?" They said, not adulteress,
a bigamist,
convicted bigamist, and her paramour in the White House.
Well, yeah, this is serious personal
yeah.
attacks, which that hadn't. I mean, not to say it didn't happen, but this took center stage.
Yeah, to really drag. You're right. To drag in the wife. Her name's Rachel Donaldson.
Yep.
Again, you're right. She had been married, but you file for divorce. It's Tennessee. It's the frontier,
Right.
and you can't make photocopies of the decree.
Yes.
It's just so this kind of thing happened.
It did. It
People
probably
moved
happened
on.
more than once.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure it happened quite a bit to women, especially as they would be left behind. Men would move west or whatever.
Yes.
And then you didn't know. You didn't know what happened. The man didn't know, hey, I left this woman behind in Nashville, but hey, if scarlet fever runs through the town, she could be dead. I'm out here on the trail. She doesn't know if the Indians have killed me. You just don't know. It's just this kind of thing, this sort of frontier situation.
The anachronistic conditions are something we really need to take into
we
account.
don't really understand them
We don't
right
understand
now.
it.
It's like,
because
what?
it's outside our experience.
But it's...
Yeah, so the circumstances of their marriage it's easy to understand how that happened on the one hand, but it's also hard for Americans today to understand.
Yeah.
How could you not know? But the worst part about going after her was it very likely caused her death.
Yes.
She was torn up over this. It really wore on her.
He wins the election, and she dies before the inauguration.
Yeah,
she
in
doesn't
December.
Even make it, she makes it a month after that. And we mentioned this in the show prep. Jackson never forgave anybody for any of this.
He didn't forgive anybody anyway. Yeah. This was really a reason because
they really were.
They were a love match. They really were a power couple in many ways. Yeah. She was very good for him. He was good for her. They actually were very much in love. No children, if I recall correctly.
No children.
But she was probably the only civilizing force this man had because he's definitely
frontiersman.
A frontiersman. That's correct, and all that goes with that. So they may have sown the wind, but they reaped the whirlwind in many ways because
it didn't help anyways.
That's correct.
Jackson wins hands down.
Yeah, it
is no contest really.
You're right. I mean, there's
some strongholds for Adams, but they're not really. The West has now become a power politically, which is something that's new and not quite understood. Jackson understood it. Clay understood it. But guys like Adams or even Calhoun, they're still very original 13 colony oriented here. Mm-hmm. They think the power base is all there and it's moving west.
Well, it's probably similar to the situation we see today. You have the largest individual population centers along the 13
East Coast. Yeah.
But when you look at the population out west, it's growing quickly as people are moving from the east to the west. That's going to be a little bit harder to catch on to, especially between censuses and the redistricting that would go on.
Absolutely. And the Western character was very different because these guys are the ones, guys and gals, are the ones with that rugged frontiersman attitude, as you said.
Jackson was the original rugged individual.
That's correct. He was.
I mean, in many ways.
And that's what. And they saw a kindred spirit in him. He's one of us.
Yes.
He will not forget us because Jackson. Everybody knew him when he makes his oath to you. He keeps it. He keeps his word. That's one of the things that it's and he sometimes to your peril because he holds grudges very well. But when he makes a vow, he keeps it.
Yeah, and they knew how to organize. They were they were way more organized than Adams and his supporters and associates, and they campaigned better. And that's part
which
of
is really unusual because when you think about it, we're still in a time when candidates don't campaign. It's all done by proxy.
Right. That's. I don't think we can underestimate that value because that is completely alien to us today.
Yeah.
But that's what these folks. That's how you can get personal attacks on a man's wife is because the candidate's not doing it. His subordinates are doing it.
Exactly.
So there's a deniability. That's correct. And there are willing accomplices on both sides.
Absolutely.
Because in this modern day and age, there's a very strong bias with regards to the press for one side. It is much more diverse here. You have papers that are openly one-sided and the other-sided. And depending on who you read, it's far more a divided house, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that has both advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah. So, him winning in 1828, looking back on it, looks like a foregone conclusion, but, it wasn't. Because the sitting president still had great power, and like you said, there wasn't a major issue that...
No, he was actually a pretty good president.
Right.
But he was at the wrong time.
But at the wrong time, because a wronged man got cheated out of the presidency. We don't like that as Americans.
That's correct.
Yeah,
I think
that played into it big. That
it was
again,
huge.
just the accusation, the corrupt bargain, but additionally, people like fairness.
Yep.
They like for people to get a fair shake.
That's right.
And it was felt that Jackson didn't.
Yeah,
So-
the fight was rigged. It was not a fair slugfest.
You know, it's interesting. I think he's the only one of those 5 contested elections that ran again the next term or the next election. The original Adams did not.
Right.
Gore did not run.
That's correct. That's
Hillary is not running.
Right.
And the one in the 1880s,
Benjamin Harrison.
Benjamin Harrison. Is he the one who died?
No, that's Garfield.
Garfield died.
Yeah,
Garfield died. And whoever ran against him... Chester A.
Arthur was
yes.
after him. Yeah, and he did run for one term.
Yeah, and he decided not to run, but that left it wide open.
Right.
But, so
Arthur
that was a
knew-
time when Democrats weren't winning elections anyways.
Yeah, Arthur knew he was quite ill.
Well,
Yeah,
Grover
and that's
Cleveland
what
did win as a Democrat during that time.
Right,
Twice.
but he wasn't the guy who ran against...
Garfield, no.
So, again, nobody who lost in one of those contested elections ran again except him.
Yeah.
So you can make the case that, bad candidates aside, is this an anomaly or not?
I think it's a clear...
It's an anomaly because he did run.
Well, that's correct, but it's a clear manifesto. I mean, it's a moratorium. Oh, damn it, Jim. No, it's a clear indicator. Thank you very much. Of that he was wronged, and
Yes.
he knew it. And more to the point, everybody knew it, and that's why Quincy Adams probably was a little worried, and he should have been.
Yeah. Now I will say this: all of the other cases were not nearly this extreme of a vote difference.
That's right.
As far as percentages go.
And the perception of here is a clear perception. This is not innuendo. This did happen, and everybody knew it. Whether it was actually as advertised or not, if it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's going to be called a duck.
Yep. So Jackson wins this relatively handily,
Yep.
and he starts, which I find interesting, what we now call the spoils system.
Yes.
He starts handing out jobs left and right. Now, that always happens, but apparently this guy took it to a whole new level.
Oh, yeah, and he sets the stage for what comes afterwards, because
Yes.
by the time of Lincoln, they're lining up outside of his office to try to get preferments. Both of his elections. I mean, it's become a feeding frenzy
Yes.
where this happens. And in fact, that's one of the things, that's the only reason that he got the 13th Amendment passed, is because he used that, Lincoln did,
Right.
to get those extra votes he needed to get it passed. He uses
Well, when you have
spoil system.
party changes with a new president now, the spoil system really does come into play. When you're all part of the same party, you're all just, it doesn't really matter. You're all on the same team. So this is an interesting change. Now that we have a true two-party system start to take off, even though that second party really fluctuates for the next 30 years.
Yeah. The National Republicans kind of fizzle out.
And the Whigs take
The
over.
Whigs kind of become that next group. I think there's only one Whig president, Zachary Taylor, right?
Is he the only one? I don't think he's the only one.
No, we'd have to check that out. Stick a pin in that.
He's the one that brings Tyler on, right, as his vice president?
No, that's William Henry Harrison. Tyler is his president.
That's right.
Tippy Canoe and Tyler too.
Yes.
Well, that's how he
That's
went.
the battle that Harrison won in
That's
Indiana.
right. Exactly. Yeah.
So
No, Zachary Taylor's guy was Millard Fillmore,
right, yeah.
which nobody remembers much anyway, except for the rather strange name.
Yeah.
But you know his picture, but we can't tell you much of anything else he did.
And honestly, for some people, that makes him a good president.
Well,
He didn't screw anything up.
Well, that's correct. Because if I recall correctly, William Henry Harrison was meant to be the anti-Jackson, and he had a lot of Jackson's characteristics, so he was easy to slide into that role.
Yeah.
They said, "You don't like the party that he's done. Let me give you the alternative, and he's just as good. If you liked him, we can do better with that." And because he had the war hero thing down, and he was well liked actually. And of course, we all know him mostly because of his short tenure. I mean, it was in days.
Yes.
30 days.
Yeah, but pneumonia that he contracted at the inauguration, if I recall correctly.
Right. So we've got the political structure of the country has totally changed with this one election. To me, this is fascinating. I don't think we've seen such a sea change in American history like this, except for the Civil War.
Yeah.
You're right.
But the Civil War political parties did survive.
Well, no, they did, but it changed the nature of the country.
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant the
country
political system.
You can make an argument that the country post Civil War is not the same country as the country pre Civil War.
Absolutely.
And I mean that not just philosophically. I mean ontologically, you could make that case.
Correct. We were
ontologically.
That's a good word.
Did you love that? That's very good.
You got the $10 word out on you there.
That's
right.
We'll take that. That's pretty awesome. But you're exactly right.
Yeah.
It was not anything near. And Lincoln understood this. That's why he wanted to get the darn 13th Amendment passed, because he knew if we go back to what we did,
we're just going to be back here again.
We're back here again. We were talking about that in the show prep, how that's the absolute thing that Lincoln forced the change politically to keep in place the changes, the ontological changes that you had, because he was afraid of a backsliding almost happened, for goodness sakes, because Alexander Stephens and his folks that we saw in the movie Lincoln come forth and say, we'll give you peace. And Lincoln says, well, wait out here for a little while. Grant, go talk to them for a little while. I got some work to do. I'll get to you later.
So with this sea change, things, really does take the country on a totally new course.
Oh, yeah, so fascinating.
Jackson is probably one of the... He's not the only, because Jefferson was this way as well. Jefferson, as I've said before, he totally went against everything he ever campaigned on as president.
Yeah.
But Jackson, he did everything he said he was going to do. But he is, in the sense that he is very active as an imperial president kind of figure.
Yes, an active executive.
Yes.
He might have been one of the first. Well, think about that.
Jefferson aside.
A little bit, but
now,
Jefferson was far more moderated, I think, than Jackson was.
Well,
he had massive influence.
That's
maybe
true.
so, but I mean, if you look at Jefferson, the Louisiana Purchase, the Barbary
Wars,
Wars, all these things that he did were totally against his anti-federalist stance, which is I find very ironic.
I think he recognized perhaps the fallacies of his original position. Once you get into the system, you realize, there's got to be some federalism here. Otherwise, we can't do things.
In the one case, you've got to protect American interests. That was the Barbary Wars.
Absolutely.
But, when you get a chance to buy, half of a continent for $15 million, granted, that's a crap ton of money.
That's correct. And he had a vision that knew we needed it. Not everybody would have had that.
Exactly. But, I mean, that basically secured the continent as an American continent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Manifest Destiny was really only a true viable argument post that.
Yes, until you get coast to coast.
Right.
It's an idea, but Manifest Destiny is also what gets you coast to coast.
Yes. Well, that's right, yeah, but it became a popular item.
Yes.
Especially around the War of 1812 had some of that to it, but really the westward expansion, the whole Manifest Destiny is done because, we've already got this much. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Again, we were more than willing to keep going. Yeah. So Jackson really, he takes control of the federal government.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
He rules by executive order, what we call executive order basically today. Yeah. He rules not quite by fiat, because he can't really do that, but where he can, he does.
Yeah. Well,
he makes sure that the U.S. The second U.S. bank is totally dismantled, even though it was popular. He was one that absolutely hated it. He got that totally dismantled. We had he was also, in addition to being very anti-British, he was very anti-Indian. He did not do a damn thing to help them.
Well,
anyway.
I want to get
bring that out, because
he's a very complex character, because on the one hand, he's one of the early people to help save the Union, because he tells South Carolina, no, you absolutely cannot secede, because there is a secession crisis during his presidency, and he says, I will invade. I'll bring the army.
They almost,
we're going to kick your ass.
So, South Carolina tried to make federal tariffs null and void in their state. South Carolina, first to basically join the revolution, first to try and secede, and first to actually do
What
it.
a bunch of troublemakers.
They are a bunch of troublemakers.
South Carolina, we love you if you're listening.
Yeah,
Well,
we do.
yeah,
Because
it is
honestly, I like the plucky attitude.
Yeah.
I don't
It
necessarily
is-
like what you did with it,
Well,
but you know,
Charleston, South Carolina is one of the most beautiful cities in
It
the
is.
United States. It really is, and they're very welcoming today.
they
And
are.
then, on the other hand, though, as we've hinted at, he's probably the one American president that you could charge with genocide credibly. Now,
Absolutely.
I mean, people
That's right.
throw that around and say, well, no, George Bush or whatever. But no.
No.
If you're
Yeah.
serious about this, you're right. The Indian removal and forcing people west out of the lands that they had in Georgia, Florida, and so on, Tennessee.
Yeah, and
the
he was
Trail of
consistent
Tears.
his entire life with this.
Yeah.
The amount of land he forced the Creeks. Matter of fact, hold on.
Yep. Huh?
The amount of land that he forced the Creeks to give up is that right there. That's most of Alabama and a good chunk of
Georgia.
Of Georgia.
Yeah.
And that's before he even becomes president. And
Yeah,
he just
and
continues it.
that's just
He goes into
military.
Florida. Yeah, and that's just military.
Yeah.
And then with the
Seminoles
Georgia,
are basically eradicated.
He destroys the Seminole Nation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
the Native Americans have a great reason to revile him,
Yeah.
and because we have assimilated them into us as a nation today, I think we all kind of have to
sort of yes, sort of no.
Sort of no. That's we're
yes.
it's still we're still working on it, but I think we've come a long way, baby. But I'm telling you, we really need to call him what he is. He was a racist bastard at times.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no question as to that. And,
He was one of the things he was reviled for, and I think this is in the 1828 election, was his trading in slaves.
Mm-hmm.
He was not reviled for being a slave owner,
But-
but just in the way he traded, bought, and sold and transferred slaves. It was
Heartless.
It was inhumane even by the standards of the day.
Yeah.
Oh wow, and that is saying something.
That is saying something
Yeah.
because this is still, a time when slavery has very little opposition. The abolition movement is very, very weak, very young.
Very
Yeah.
infant stages kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jackson is,
Complex doesn't even
this
doesn't even
hero.
do justice.
He's on our money like other founders and all that.
Which is ironic considering he didn't like a national
he didn't like
bank.
the bank. Yeah.
Well, there's actually been movements to change that.
Yes,
and
there
I
have.
suspect
And
I'm mixed on that.
I'm down with it. Let's put Harriet Tubman with a rifle on the dollar or the $20 bill, and let's get rid of Andy Jackson. I'm down with it.
Interesting.
I'm
We've
down
never
with it.
talked about that, but you're right. I'm totally agree that Andrew Jackson kind of needs to go. There's lots
If you
of
don't do
good
Harriet
arguments.
Tubman, you should do a Native American.
Oh wow,
know?
that irony of ironies.
Yeah.
That's correct. Well, we got Sacagawea on the
coin.
gold coin.
Well, that's true. That's
which
true.
was not bad. It's,
Calvin Coolidge. That's who needs to be on the money.
Absolutely.
You'll never make it happen, boys. You'll
Yeah,
never make
Silent
it happen.
Cow would be great on money.
And then put on the back of it, "In God We Trust," and weaned on a pickle. But Jackson again. This very complex, successful two-term president. Forcibly saved the Union and quelled a secession crisis. Brought this whole idea of a popular figure, a strong figure into the presidency, a strong executive, an active executive, but at the same time
Deeply
genocidal,
flawed. Deeply flawed.
racist.
to put it
and-
mildly, yeah.
I know. We can't emphasize enough just how deeply flawed doesn't even begin to describe how revulsive that he
Yeah.
was in many
Yeah.
ways.
Because when you look at the different parts of his life, especially the War of 1812, the war against the Creek, no, there's nothing there other than he defeated an ally of the British.
Yeah.
That part, yes, is good.
It's consistent for him, certainly.
How he did it and what happened in the aftermath, horrible. Absolutely horrible.
Well, it actually was a precursor to what he did with the Trail of Tears.
Yes, and in Florida.
Yeah.
Now, what he did in the War of 1812 in the Battle of New Orleans, honestly, that's one of my favorite battles.
Is a genius.
It was genius.
Well, yeah, militarily, he was. There's no question he deserved his military accolades because he knew his
Absolutely.
stuff.
New stuff, and again, a frontiersman. Tough,
He had
knew
the
his stuff.
ability to
That's right.
bring men together, to keep them together. Not always an easy thing when you're talking about a lot of volunteers here. These are militias based. We don't have a standing army. It's not like by the time you get to the 1860s and you've got an officer corps that's going through West Point. There's none of that these days.
Yeah.
He keeps them together by force of his personality.
He does. And, the fact that he won the last battle of the war, which technically happened after the end of the war.
Yeah,
It's a negotiated peace,
Yes.
so it's a tie, but we actually won it.
Yeah.
So,
It's enough of a piece that the Brits decided to leave us alone,
yes.
and he proves that we can back that up.
Right,
Yes.
and it may not have made much difference regarding the war itself, but it certainly did send a signal to Europe, not just Britain, that
And I think
we're
it
not
is-
to be messed with.
It definitely does that, and I think it sends a different kind of signal to the American people. I think the War of 1812 and that Battle of New Orleans is probably one of the main reasons why he eventually becomes president, because it solidifies the public view of him.
That's right.
It's a war we were losing on our own soil. Our capital had been burned.
Absolutely.
The president had fled. The White House itself had been burned. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even called the White House then. It was the president's house.
Yeah.
It's called the White House because they whitewashed it after it was burned,
Yeah.
after they rebuilt it. But he wins a battle against a foe that was the premier army, even more so than it was during the Revolution.
Oh, absolutely! It was still the world.
Because this is the army that fought Napoleon. This is
battle
Wellington's.
hardened. Yeah.
Yeah,
Battle hardened redcoats
exactly.
straight from the peninsula, basically.
So for him to be able to provide this win, to close out the war on a high note, that had to be a major effect on the American psyche. It really had to, because we don't like to lose. Even back then,
that's right.
It's just
That's part of that frontier character that he
It
helps
is.
bring forward.
Yeah.
That doggedness, that audacity, as Roosevelt would say.
Yeah, audacity. That's a good word for Jackson.
Yeah,
It absolutely is.
what made him a good military commander, a good general, is what makes him a bad person, and how he executes his office as president.
Yeah.
Because he knew what he wanted to do, and he did it, and the cost be damned.
Yeah, and coalitions be damned.
So, moving and basically killing off tens of thousands of Indians, no big deal. Don't care. They're not citizens anyway.
Yeah.
Didn't vote for him, won't vote for him. Trading slaves and being brutal about it. Doesn't matter. They're not people. That's not a quote. That's the kind of attitude you have to have.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
essentially his attitude. Yes, these
Yeah.
are beneath me. They're not people.
Right.
So there you go, listeners. That's 1828. And became a character study of Andrew Jackson. So
Well, you
pretty interesting
kinda
Well, you
stuff.
kind of have to.
You kind of
Yeah.
have to.
So that's a lot of good stuff, you guys. A lot of good stuff, and that's exactly
Yeah.
where I wanted to go with this.
And he wins the re-election in 1832. Hands down.
hands down, no problem.
Yeah, there's
No problem winning that. Like all two-term presidents, he decides not to run again.
Yep.
Although he's one of the few two-term presidents I think could have won a third term.
Oh, he could have.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a few of
he
them.
turns it over to basically his appointed successor, is Van Buren.
Martin Van Buren, that's correct.
So let me
Who
leave you.
himself loses to William Henry Harrison because
There
they
you
want to
go.
change.
There we go. Now we got the
Bring it
Yes,
back.
3 in a row is very unusual. 4 in a row, but to the same party, unheard of.
See, and that's kind of back
Roosevelt
to that,
aside.
back to that original premise we were talking about at the very beginning, how we like that pendulum to swing. We do not want it to be...
We do now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
This is one of
This
those
was new.
illustrations-
This is where it started.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
That's
it's the start of two-party system in the U.S. It's the start of an active executive. It's a lot of stuff. It's very interesting.
You also see the political lines being drawn. This in it might have been the 1832 election, but it might have been 1828. North versus South. It is under Jackson where this solidifies.
Oh, that's correct. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
That's where that's why you have such difficulty later. With some of Zachary Taylor as a war hero is able to win, and Harrison is able to win, but the guys that come after him, Franklin Pierce, he can't hold a coalition. James Buchanan can't hold a coalition. That's just kind of...
And Tyler basically walks out of all the parties.
Well, that's right.
And-
Well, because he kind of just walked into it. He
Yeah.
was his vice president, and
Yeah. You're right. It starts to solidify that the Democratic Party is the party of the South.
that's right. There's a
The
regionalization.
Whigs start to be the party of the North and industrialization,
Yep.
and that split comes back. That agrarian versus northern trade interests and industrial
That's correct.
interests.
It was inevitable,
solidifies
but-
regionally
Yeah.
in a greater way than was before.
Yeah.
Because
That
you
is
still
correct.
had, some back and forth. But now that you have a true two-party system, and they are definitely power based regionally. It's all over as far as how things are going to play out later.
So, boys, that's a solid hour on Andrew Jackson.
How about that?
And the elections of 1820, 28, 4, 28, and even a little mention of 32.
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
and 1800, and way off in some serious rabbit holes with
1860
and some other stuff.
so
It's all connected, boys.
and that's
It
what
is.
we always say.
Yeah.
Everything's connected, and that's what I loved about doing this. You draw that line right from Monroe all the way through 20, 24, 28. They're bookends. It's all connected. And Trevor Slattery and very complicated.
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
It's complicated. That's right.
So, Francis, what is on tap for next time?
Next time, we're going back for our favorite words of wisdom, our Code of Honor episode. Guys, we love doing those. I'm always amazed. We come at it, we don't really know where we're going to end up with it, but we always come up with some really great fun, with some great quotations. We know you're going to love it.
Before we go, one final thing.
Yes.
Should have done this before.
Yes. I think I know where you want to go.
Today is April 3rd. The day this episode drops. That is my father's birthday.
Well,
that is
raise one to my dad.
Raise a glass to them,
Okay.
so absolutely.
Yes. And I'll just mention as we go out, we are in the middle still of the blink. We're here gathered in defiance of directives to stay away from people. Hey,
What are you going to do?
we're snakes and otters.
That's right.
We're doing this.
Amen to that.
Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Be sure to spread the word on your social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We are on Instagram and on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
Let your friends know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just search Snakes and Otters Podcast to find us, and please remember to leave us your comments and reviews. It helps people find us.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Catch us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.